You have been told a lie your entire life. The lie is simple. Hieroglyphs are a dead language that only a handful of people can read, and the secrets carved on the walls of Egyptian temples will take centuries to fully understand. That was true until very recently. Because in the time it takes you to read a single sentence, an artificial intelligence built by Google just translated a 4,000-year-old inscription that Egyptologists had been struggling with for decades. The symbols appeared on a temple wall in Upper Egypt. They had been photographed, cataloged, and stored in university archives for over a century. Nobody could agree on what they meant. The AI processed the image in under 10 seconds. And what it found was not a prayer, not a royal decree, it was a tax record. A grain merchant arguing with a government official about weight measurements. 4,000 years ago, someone was complaining about taxes, and we never knew. That right there is what blew my mind when I started researching this video. We spent 2 centuries trying to read these symbols, and when we finally did, we found out that ancient Egyptians were basically us. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to trace the entire arc of how humanity went from staring at hieroglyphs in total confusion to building machines that decode them in seconds. And along the way, we are going to visit carbonized scrolls pulled from a volcano, 5,000-year-old clay tablets from Iraq, and a 600-year-old manuscript that still defeats every AI on the planet. If you think you know how we read the ancient world, think again. To understand how revolutionary this moment is, you have to go back to where it all started. July 1799. A French military officer named Pierre-François Bouchard was reinforcing a fort near the town of Rashid in the Nile Delta when his men uncovered a massive slab of dark granodiorite. It weighed over 760 kilograms. It stood over a meter tall, and carved into its surface were 3 bands of text. The top was in hieroglyphs. The middle was in Demotic, a cursive Egyptian script. The bottom was in ancient Greek. Bouchard immediately understood the significance. If all 3 bands said the same thing, the Greek could be used to crack the Egyptian. The Rosetta Stone had been found. Scholars across Europe predicted the mystery would be solved within weeks. It took 23 years, because hieroglyphs are not an alphabet. They are a hybrid system. Some symbols represent sounds, others represent objects, others represent abstract ideas. A single glyph could be phonetic in one context and pictographic in another. It was like trying to decode a language that simultaneously operates as text, emoji, and code. 23 years. Let that sink in. The greatest linguistic minds in all of Europe, working with unlimited royal funding and access to the actual stone. And it still took more than 2 decades to crack a system that a machine can now process in seconds. And the man who finally did it nearly destroyed himself in the process. Literally. His body gave out before his mind did. His name was Jean-François Champollion, a French philologist who had been obsessed with Egypt since childhood. By age 16, he was already lecturing on ancient languages. By 19, he was a professor. He dedicated his entire adult life to one single goal: reading hieroglyphs. His breakthrough came on September 14, 1822. He had been studying cartouches, the oval frames that surround royal names, copied from the temple at Abu Simbel. Using his knowledge of Coptic, the last surviving form of ancient Egyptian, he matched sounds to symbols. He identified the names of Rameses and Thutmose. Then he read a word that was not a name. For the first time in 1,400 years, someone had read ancient Egyptian. Legend says he ran to his brother's office screaming, "I've got it," and collapsed unconscious. He did not wake up for 5 days. On September 27th, he presented his findings to the Academy in Paris. The field of Egyptology was born. But here is the part nobody talks about. Champollion had cracked the code. He had not translated everything. That would take another 2 centuries of painstaking work by thousands of scholars, each one inching forward word by word, inscription by inscription. And there were hundreds of thousands of inscriptions to go. And that is exactly where AI enters the story. Because what took Champollion 23 years and nearly killed him, and what took thousands of scholars 2 more centuries after that, a machine can now do in the time it takes to blink. But how? How do you teach a computer to read symbols that stumped humanity for millennia? On July 15, 2020, exactly 221 years after the Rosetta Stone was discovered, Google launched a tool called Fabricius. It was built with the Australian Centre for Egyptology at Macquarie University, Ubisoft, and the design studio Cycle Interactive. It was the first publicly available digital tool capable of decoding Egyptian hieroglyphs using machine learning. Named after George Fabricius, the 16th century father of epigraphy, the system works in 3 layers. The first is a learning module that teaches users the basics of hieroglyphic script through interactive exercises. The second is a playful translator that converts modern text into hieroglyphs for social media sharing. But the third layer is where the real revolution happens. It is called the workbench. Designed exclusively for professional Egyptologists, it allows researchers to upload photographs of real hieroglyphs from temple walls or artifacts. The system processes the image, outlines faded or damaged symbols, and uses Google Cloud's AutoML vision to compare each glyph against a database of over 800 unique hieroglyphic signs. The machine learning model then classifies each symbol and proposes translations, connected to established dictionaries of Middle Egyptian. And every time a researcher corrects the AI, the model gets better. It learns from its mistakes. It refines its pattern recognition. It builds a growing database of preserved inscriptions that feeds back into the academic community. And here is what really gets me. The popular theory when AI started being applied to ancient languages was that machines would just be glorified dictionaries, faster lookup tools, nothing more. People said a computer could never understand context, could never grasp the dual nature of hieroglyphs as both sound and symbol. And they were right at first. But they underestimated something crucial. The truth is more fascinating than the skeptics predicted. The AI does not think like a human Egyptologist. It does not understand mythology or theology or royal politics. What it does is something no human brain can do. It processes patterns across tens of thousands of inscriptions simultaneously. It notices statistical relationships between symbols that appear together across centuries of texts. It detects frequency distributions that reveal whether a glyph is functioning phonetically or ideographically in a given context. In other words, it does not understand the language. It understands the mathematics of the language. And sometimes, mathematics sees things that human intuition misses. Researchers have reported cases where Fabricius flagged symbol combinations that had been misread by scholars for decades. Not because the AI was smarter, but because it had no preconceptions. It had no favorite theory. It simply followed the numbers. The tool was released as open source, meaning its code is available to anyone. Google stated that Egyptian hieroglyphs were just the beginning. The same technology could be adapted to any ancient writing system on Earth. And that is exactly what happened. Because while Fabricius was cracking hieroglyphs in Egypt, something far more dramatic was unfolding on the other side of the Mediterranean. In Italy, buried under a volcanic wasteland, there is a library. Not a metaphorical one, an actual, physical library. Imagine hundreds of scrolls, sealed under 20 meters of volcanic mud for 2,000 years. Every single one turned to charcoal, and someone figured out how to read them without ever touching them. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under a catastrophic wave of superheated gas, ash, and volcanic debris. Herculaneum was hit hardest. The town was buried under more than 20 meters of material. But the eruption did something paradoxical. While it destroyed everything on the surface, the intense heat carbonized hundreds of papyrus scrolls stored in a private library, effectively preserving them in a state of charred fragility. The scrolls were discovered in the 1750s inside a villa believed to have belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Over 1,000 scrolls were recovered. They represented the only intact library from the classical world. Philosophers, poets, thinkers, whose words had been lost for millennia, were possibly sitting inside those blackened cylinders. The problem was devastating. The scrolls were so fragile that any attempt to unroll them turned them to dust. For over 270 years, they sat in museums and university collections, visible, tangible, completely unreadable. Scholars estimated it might take 500 years to decipher their contents using traditional methods. It took artificial intelligence less than one. 500 years compressed into months. And the story of how it happened reads like a Hollywood screenplay. Because the person who cracked the first word was not a tenured professor at Oxford, not a world-renowned linguist with 40 years of experience. He was a 21-year-old computer science undergraduate, and he made the discovery at a house party in Nebraska. You cannot make this stuff up. In March 2023, computer scientist Brent Seals of the University of Kentucky, along with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross, launched the Vesuvius Challenge. They offered over $1 million in prize money to anyone who could use artificial intelligence to read the Herculaneum scrolls without physically opening them. The method relied on a technique Seals had been developing for over 20 years: virtual unwrapping. High-energy X-ray computed tomography scans create three-dimensional images of the rolled-up scrolls. Then, machine learning algorithms are trained to detect the almost invisible carbon-based ink on the carbonized papyrus layers. The chemistry of ancient ink is different from medieval ink. It is nearly invisible to X-rays, but the tomography captures subtle information about where ink was deposited, and AI can amplify those traces until letters emerge from the darkness. In October 2023, Luke Ferrator, a computer science student at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, was sitting at a house party when his phone buzzed. A collaborator had uploaded new high-resolution papyrus segments to a shared server. Ferrator remotely accessed his desktop computer from his phone, fed the new segments into the AI detector he had been building for 6 months, and waited. The program returned a word, a single ancient Greek word: porphyras, purple, the color of royalty. The first word read from an unopened Herculaneum scroll in nearly 2,000 years. Purple. 2,000 years of absolute silence, broken by a single word about a color that symbolized power, wealth, and divinity in the ancient world. A 21-year-old student, sitting in a dormitory in Nebraska, became the first human being in nearly 2 millennia to read a word from those scrolls. And what followed next was even more stunning, because that first word was just the crack in the dam. By February 2024, Ferrator, along with Youssef Nader from Berlin and Julian Schilliger from Switzerland, had decoded over 2,000 characters across 4 full columns of text, far exceeding the competition's requirements of 4 passages of 140 characters. They won the $700,000 grand prize. The text turned out to be a previously unknown philosophical work, probably by Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean philosopher believed to have been the intellectual resident of the very villa where the scrolls were found. The author wrote about pleasure, about whether good things are more delightful in small quantities or in abundance. His conclusion: abundance wins. He used food as an analogy, arguing that we should not believe scarce things are automatically more pleasant than plentiful ones. 2,000 years ago, an Epicurean philosopher was essentially arguing against the economics of artificial scarcity. Then, in February 2025, the Vesuvius Challenge announced another breakthrough. A scroll housed at Oxford's Bodleian Libraries, known as Ferrach 172, was virtually unrolled using scans from the Diamond Light Source synchrotron facility. Among the first words deciphered were the ancient Greek terms for foolish, disgust, fear, and life. Scholars believe this scroll is also by Philodemus, based on his characteristic writing style and thematic use of philosophical vocabulary.
And this is what gets me every time. The scrolls survived a volcanic eruption. They survived 2,000 years underground. They survived centuries of failed attempts to open them. And when we finally read them, we found a philosopher talking about how to enjoy life. There is something profoundly beautiful about that. But the AI revolution in ancient languages does not stop in Egypt or Italy, because there is an even older writing system waiting, one that dates back 5,000 years, and there are 500,000 tablets that nobody has read.
Cuneiform is the oldest known writing system in human history. It appeared around 3400 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, in what is now modern Iraq. The word literally means wedge-shaped, referring to the marks made by pressing a sharpened reed stylus into wet clay tablets. The Sumerians invented it. The Akkadians adopted it. The Babylonians and Assyrians refined it. Over 3,000 years of civilization recorded on clay. And clay survives almost anything: fire, flood, earthquake, war. While papyrus decays and parchment crumbles, clay endures. The result is staggering. There are over 500,000 cuneiform tablets stored in museums, libraries, and universities around the world. They contain everything imaginable: royal decrees, legal contracts, medical prescriptions, love letters, mathematical equations, astronomical observations, recipes, complaints about bad business partners. The full spectrum of human civilization pressed into clay with a reed stick. But there is a devastating bottleneck. Cuneiform is extraordinarily difficult to read. Each sign can have multiple phonetic and semantic values depending on context. Only a few hundred experts worldwide can read Akkadian cuneiform fluently. At the current rate of human translation, it would take centuries to process what we already have.
Centuries. That is how long the backlog would take using human scholars alone. 500,000 tablets sitting in drawers and vaults all over the world, each one containing a fragment of the earliest human thoughts ever recorded. And we simply do not have enough people alive who can read them. To put that in perspective, there are more cuneiform tablets waiting to be translated than there are books in most public libraries. And each tablet could contain anything: a king's decree, a mother's prayer, a merchant's complaint. Until now, most of them were locked in silence.
In 2023, a multidisciplinary team from Tel Aviv University and Ariel University, led by computer scientist Guy Guthertz and archaeologist Shai Gordon, published a breakthrough in the journal PNAS Nexus. They had built a neural machine translation model for Akkadian cuneiform, the same type of technology that powers Google Translate. The AI was trained on the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus, a database from the University of Pennsylvania containing tens of thousands of translated tablets. It learned to translate in two ways, from transliterated Latin script to English, and directly from cuneiform Unicode symbols to English. The results were remarkable. For short to medium-length sentences, the model achieved a quality score of roughly 37 on the standard translation benchmark, where Google Translate scores around 60 for Spanish to English. Not perfect, but for a first-generation tool working on a language that has been dead for 2,000 years, with a training set thousands of times smaller than what commercial translators use, it was extraordinary, and the translations revealed something humbling. Many of the tablets contained content that still resonates. One Akkadian scribe, over 3,000 years ago, wrote advice that could appear in any modern self-help book. If he cleans his garments, his days will be long. Meanwhile, at Google DeepMind, a separate team was attacking ancient Greek. Their system, Ithaca, trained on over 63,000 inscriptions, could restore damaged text with 62% accuracy on its own. But when human historians used Ithaca as an assistant, their accuracy jumped from 25% to 72%. The AI could also identify where an inscription originated with 71% accuracy and date it to within 30 years. Historians used it to redate key political decrees from 5th century Athens, directly contributing to scholarly debates about classical democracy.
Think about that for a second. An AI trained on 63,000 ancient inscriptions helped historians rewrite the timeline of Athenian democracy, the birthplace of the political system that most of the modern world is built on, and a neural network just corrected the dates. That is the power of human-machine collaboration. The historian brings context, the machine brings scale. Together, they see what neither could alone. But there is one ancient text that has defeated every human, every code breaker, and every artificial intelligence that has ever tried to crack it. And it has been doing so for 600 years.
The Voynich manuscript sits in a vault at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, catalogued simply as MS-408. It is 240 pages long. It is filled with illustrations of unknown plants, strange astronomical diagrams, naked figures bathing in interconnected pools of liquid, and page after page of text in a script and language that no one has ever seen before or since. Carbon dating places the vellum between 1404 and 1438. 5 different scribes are believed to have written it. The earliest confirmed owner was an associate of Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, but more than a century of ownership is completely missing from the historical record. Cryptographers from the NSA tried to break it in the 1950s. They failed. Linguists have proposed it is encoded Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, early Romance, even an artificial constructed language. None of the hypotheses have held up to scrutiny. In 2018, computer scientists Greg Kondrak and Bradley Hauer at the University of Alberta used an AI trained on 380 languages to analyze the manuscript's letter frequency. The algorithm identified Hebrew as the most likely source language with high confidence. When they tested the hypothesis that the words were anagrammed, over 80% matched entries in a Hebrew dictionary. But Voynich specialists immediately pushed back. The methodology was questioned. The translations made little grammatical sense. The scholarly consensus remains unchanged. The Voynich manuscript is still unbroken. The text shows statistical properties that resemble natural language at higher levels of organization, but its character sequences are far more predictable than any known language. It follows rules. It has structure. But what those rules encode, nobody knows.
And honestly, that is the part that keeps me up at night. because the Voynich is not random noise. It is too structured for that, but it is not any language we have ever seen. AI can find patterns in it, but patterns are not meaning. And without meaning, the most powerful computers on Earth are just as lost as the scholars who stared at those pages 600 years ago. But the Voynich is not alone. There are about a dozen writing systems on this planet that remain completely undeciphered, and some of them guard secrets that could rewrite everything we think we know about the ancient world.
On the island of Crete, in the ruins of Minoan palaces, archaeologists have found tablets inscribed with a script called Linear A. It has been known since 1900, when Arthur Evans first excavated Knossos. Over a century later, it remains completely undeciphered. The signs can be sounded out using phonetic values borrowed from its successor, Linear B, which was cracked in the 1950s. But the resulting words are meaningless because the underlying Minoan language is entirely unknown. It has no proven relatives, no descendant languages, no bilingual key. In modern-day Iran, there is Proto-Elamite, one of the earliest writing systems on Earth, dating back 5,000 years. It may contain up to 1,000 distinct symbols, fragmentary administrative records on clay tablets. But without links to any known language family, the text resists every attempt at decipherment. And then there is the Indus Valley script. Over 4,000 inscriptions found across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, on stamp seals, amulets, and small tablets from a civilization that flourished from 2600 to 1900 BCE. The symbols are short. The sequences are brief. There is no confirmed grammatical structure, and there is no Rosetta Stone equivalent, no bilingual text, no anchor. Researchers at MIT and Google DeepMind tested AI tools on these undeciphered systems. The results were sobering. The algorithms could identify patterns, calculate statistical relationships, and detect structural regularities. But without knowing what language a script represents, pattern recognition alone cannot produce translation. As one linguist put it, AI cannot produce original thought. It can speed up the process. But the breakthrough, if it comes, will come from the ground. A new dig, a bilingual inscription, a fragment that connects the unknown to the known.
And that right there is the humbling truth about all of this. AI is extraordinary. It reads carbonized scrolls. It translates 5,000-year-old clay tablets. It restores broken Greek inscriptions. But it has limits. A dozen ancient scripts remain locked because there is simply not enough data to train a model on. The machine needs a key to turn. And for these languages, that key is still buried somewhere in the earth, waiting for someone to dig it up.
The arc of this story stretches across 5,000 years. From the first reed pressed into wet clay in Mesopotamia to an undergraduate at a house party reading a 2,000-year-old scroll from his phone. From Champollion collapsing in his brother's office after 23 years of obsessive work to a neural network classifying hieroglyphs in under 10 seconds. From the Rosetta Stone sitting behind glass at the British Museum, to Fabricius sitting on a free website, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. The pattern is unmistakable. Every generation finds a new way to listen to the dead. And every time we listen, we discover the same thing. They were like us. They argued about taxes. They wrote about pleasure. They gave advice about keeping your clothes clean. They looked at the stars and tried to make sense of the universe. They loved. They feared. They wondered. And they wrote it all down, in whatever medium they had, trusting that someone, someday, would read it.